we stand up for the independence of the court and support the court in this vital matter. We are going to have a Foreign Affairs Council of Ministers of Foreign Affairs of the European Union, and I'm going to ask the other 26 partners to declare the backing to the ICJ, to its decision, and also if Israel continues to pursue against that opinion of the International Court of Justice, that we try to take the right measure to enforce that decision and to back one of the most important bodies of the UN Charter.
In other news, the situation in Papua New Guinea continues to worsen, with new reports suggesting over 2,000 people could be buried beneath metres of mud and debris following Friday's devastating landslide. North Korea fired a ballistic missile over Japan on Monday, with residents in parts of the island told to shelter in place. Video showed the rocket exploding mid-air. And China is injecting $47 billion into its semiconductor industry as Washington tries restricting Beijing's access to advanced chips. This has been Matt Boyland with your TNT News Brief. We'll be back with more at the top of the next hour.
Military families often sacrifice precious time away from loved ones while serving our country. And for those with children, the separation can be especially difficult.
We were worried that with him leaving, that she would lose those connections with her dad.
Some of life's best moments happen between parents, children, and the pages of a good book. United Through Reading provides that connection.
You can watch your mom or dad read a book to you, and it almost feels like they're really there.
We ensure they remain a consistent, meaningful part of their children's lives, no matter the distance.
Just seeing Jacob recognize Daddy again after a long time just melted my heart.
And now, as we're facing greater isolation from our loved ones, United Through Reading is also available to veterans. Learn more about United Through Reading and download our free secure app at unitedthroughreading.org.
I'm CAL FIRE Battalion Chief Isaac Sanchez, and normally we like to provide you with tips on how to keep yourselves and your family safe during wildfires. But given the historic impacts that the weather has had on our state this year, we would like to provide you with tips on how to keep yourself safe during extreme weather. If you reside in an area susceptible to flooding, please take the necessary steps to prepare to evacuate if advised. Make sure you've identified at least 2 exit routes out of your neighborhood, as one of them may be blocked or flooded. As the weather develops, remember to check in on vulnerable neighbors and family members. They may need additional time to prepare for evacuation. And just like during a wildfire, if you feel unsafe, please evacuate. You don't have to wait for the order to come. Keep an emergency go bag ready in case you need to evacuate. And always remember to plan for the safety of your pets as well. If you must leave, never drive around roadblocks. It can take as little as 12 inches of water to sweep your vehicle away. And always remember the mantra, turn around, don't drown. Be aware of first responders working in highly impacted areas, especially on the roads. For additional safety tips and updates on CAL FIRE activities, follow us on social media or visit fire.ca.gov.
Hi, I'm Susan Lucci. I never thought about heart disease until I had my own heart event. At first, like so many other women out there, I ignored my symptoms. A slight pressure on my chest, shortness of breath. I thought, I don't have time to be sick. I had a 90% blockage in my main artery and a 75% blockage in the adjacent artery. I received 2 stents in my arteries. Stents developed through research funded by the American Heart Association. Those stents saved my life. I'm so grateful to the American Heart Association. Their research helped save my life. I can enjoy life with my children, my grandchildren, and my friends. Please, listen to your heart. The only reason I'm here today is because I did. Learn more about the American Heart Association's life-saving work at helpheart.org.
We're witnessing the biggest merger in history. Big government and big business are getting together to tell us what to do, what to say, and what to think. And the only way they can do it is to work around the Constitution. Sometimes this alignment is voluntary, sometimes not. Either way, it portends a profound change in the way we live, and not for the better. An early hint of this merger occurred in 2013. That's when the Obama administration implemented what it called Operation Choke Point. The idea was to choke off a type of business, payday lending, that the administration didn't like but couldn't get Congress to ban. Payday lenders make small, short-term loans at high interest rates. Their customers are usually in need of quick cash, for example, to pay a bill that's due before the next paycheck arrives. This is entirely legal. Nonetheless, the Obama administration pressured banks not to process credit card payments to these businesses or give them loans. Banks are heavily regulated and very susceptible to government pressure. All the government had to do was apply pressure to two banks, Four Oaks Bank in North Carolina and Commerce West in California. Soon, others took the hint and stopped doing business with payday lenders. State governments have taken a cue from the federal government. In 2018, New York State warned banks and insurance companies about reputational risk in doing business.
If you've been told to pull up your socks, then make sure it's a pair of TNT socks. The TNT shop is now open at tntradio.live.
Very warm welcome to the Muckrakers, the show where we strip the day's big talking points down to their bare bones and devour the red meat of pure debate as we focus on the stories that matter to you, wherever you're listening or watching from around the world. And today we're going to discuss the possibility of national service being brought back should the Tories win the next general election, very likely, and former President Donald Trump set to consider pardoning Julian Assange if he takes office. And why is crime becoming so out of control in the UK? And most of all, I want to hear your views. Do get in touch. This is how you can call us.
Our lines are open. From the U.S. and Canada, call 1-888-201-6425. From the U.K., call 033-0024-1026. And from Australia and New Zealand, call 1-800-670-310. Free speech is alive and well on today's News Talk, TNT Radio.
Free speech is indeed alive and well. If you've got any thoughts on the topics we talk about today, or even if you want to raise something completely different, like who's going to stand in an election, for example, do get in touch. Today, the Muckrakers is made up of myself, Andrew Eborn, and once again, two titans of TNT, Rick Munn and James Freeman. How are you, boys?
Yeah, good. Raring to go.
Raring to go.
Ready for the task at hand, whatever that task may be. We're up for it, Andrew. Let's get the ball rolling.
Well, let's get that ball rolling. And I tell you what, British Prime Minister Rishi Sunak, for the next couple of weeks anyway, he's basically pledged 12 months of mandatory national service would be reintroduced if the Conservatives win the next election. And basically, 18-year-olds would be able to apply for one of 30,000 full-time military placements or volunteering one weekend a month carrying out community service. Rishi Sunak said he believed bringing back compulsory service across the UK would help foster the national spirit that emerged during the pandemic. Good heavens. Well, let's start with that then, Rick. Would you support the reintroduction of national service?
It depends on how you would define national service, Andrew. I had a great guest on yesterday who said that, it's not a bad idea to get young people to be more actively involved, for example, in their communities. So what is national service? If your idea of national service is to don combat fatigues and be dispatched out into Ukraine to fight against Mother Russia in a proxy war, well then no, I most certainly would not be for national service. But if it was, for example, to encourage community involvement with young people, to get them to be more active and more participant in their communities, to add value to the communities, I wouldn't be against that. So I suppose it depends on what your definition of national service is, because what it is to one person might be different to someone else. And of course, I'm sure the teenagers will be up in arms at the thought of having to give their time up for free at the weekends. But yeah, it mightn't do them any harm in the long run. When you look at the Shar that's currently inhabiting our countries at the minute, it doesn't bode well for the future, at least from what I can see. Anyway.
I mean, the definition would be, I mean, if we go to war, and it's maybe not such a big if you talk about certain things, they would be called upon. I mean, that's the reality. What do you think, James?
I'd like to see him try, to be honest with you. I don't think there's much patriotism left in our young people for this country, for good reason, after what the politicians have done over particularly the last 4 years, but the past few decades, to be honest with you. Why would you go and fight for your country and join up to work for your country after what the politicians have done? I think I agree with Rick, though. I think, yes, okay, potentially it could be a positive thing, but let's be honest, this is a pretext to all of this march to war that the British government and NATO are on at the moment. The British government has been talking for a while about the recruitment problem it's got in the military, the fact that they might need to consider conscription. Andrew Bridgen was on the Freeman Report last week talking about the fact that France and Germany have already put the legislation in place for conscription. There's a debate in America. This is about the war with Russia and potentially a war with China. They need boots on the ground, and I think that's what this is about. And my answer to that, because I've got 2 young children, is they can do one. They're not taking my children to fight another bankers' war.
Yeah, I mean, you make a very interesting point. They say that nobody will be excluded, and obviously there's a few young royals who would be called upon as well. But what are your views on that, Rick? Is it right that the royals go to war with the rest of people?
Well, here's the thing, just on this issue of enforceability as well, Andrew, I think this is very important to discuss too. So even if this is brought in and even if it is signed into law, how are they ever going to enforce it? One of the headlines that I read about this yesterday was it started off by saying you won't be jailed. You won't be jailed by refusing to do national service that comes in. Even if you were, the jails, we don't have enough capacity to put people in jails at the minute. We're not locking up actual criminals at the minute, let alone a squad of 18-year-olds that maybe refused to do national service. And on the other hand, even if it was a more community orientated thing, 1 weekend a month for 12 months, how do you enforce that? Again, it's difficult to get some kids to go to school at the moment to get an education when they're 12, 13 and 14 years of age. How are you going to get 18-year-olds that simply don't want to be part of this program to play ball? It's not like you can cut their benefits, really. In most cases, it's not like you can strong arm them to do it. A lot of them have a great sense of self-entitlement or simply no will to do anything of the sort. So I think there's a lot of, saber rattling here and a lot of, smoke being blown. But this policy, whether you agree with it or not, is going to be nigh on impossible to enforce, either to get them to go into the military or to provide a weekend a month for 12 months doing something positive in the community. And of course, the royals, would they be accepted from this or would they not? Time will tell. But again, the finger would point to say, well, if they're not doing it, I'm not doing it. So you can stick your national service where the sun don't shine. I think it's on a hiding to nothing, this policy myself.
Yeah, well, I think they're definitely going to say it's going to apply to everybody, but you're absolutely right. You need to have that enforcement mechanism. So do you think we have a duty to serve our country in this way, James?
It depends on what the purpose is. If, like I said, it's going for another bankers' war. I mean, this war, proxy war between America and Russia, why should ordinary folk be fighting in that? It doesn't serve our interest. We shouldn't be going to war with a nuclear power. That makes us all less safe, I think, across the world. And quite frankly, if I was a youngster, I'd be saying, well, why should I do that? It's not like the 1940s when we had Hitler. Russia is nothing like that. And those people that try and convince us of that are lying, quite frankly. I don't support Russia. I've said that many times before, but I can see why Russia invaded Ukraine, because the West and NATO have been prodding the bear. They've been moving slowly and slowly closer surrounding Russia. And Russia is concerned about its security, just in the same way that the US would be concerned if the same was happening in Canada or Mexico. The other thing to say about this as well, and Nigel Farage came out with this in the last couple of days, he says that this policy has come because the Tories have been doing research panels with reform people that are voting for reform, and they believe this is a popular idea with reform voters. So I would say to Rishi, if he thinks people are going to come back because of this one policy to the Tories, then he really is living in cuckoo land, I think.
Yeah, and well, it's interesting. I listened to Keir Starmer's speech yesterday, and he was sort of rubbishing it, saying it was basically a teenage dad's army, if you remember that. We're all Zoomed now, I guess, nowadays. So you're looking at that sort of thing. So he was sort of rubbishing it. And it is interesting on that sort of basis, because the other thing is obviously the costing, where the money comes from. And they've made it fairly clear that some of the monies are going to be taken from levelling up. And obviously that was one of the key sort of policies. What do you think of that, Rick? Is it right to steal from that piggy bank?
Well, robbing Peter to pay Paul never works out. And when you think about the amount of money that, for example, has been pledged, or in just Ukraine alone over the last 2.5 years, with ongoing support pledged for the foreseeable future there too, it shows you that the money can be gotten if it's needed to be gotten. And if I can make one other point, actually, on when this may be a viable thing to do and when people may actually buy into it. Again, I had a guest on yesterday and they said, listen, if we're about to be imminently invaded by a ground army, or we're about to be overrun in our countries by a foreign force that are piling over our shores, literally hell-bent on enslaving us and destroying us and our families, I don't think anybody would have a problem with national service at that point, or taking up arms to protect their lives, to protect their family, and to protect their property. But we're not in that position. We're not even remotely close to that position. And that's a position that's being pushed relentlessly by the British government, for example, in their proxy war with Russia in Ukraine, to say, well, if Ukraine falls, we could be next. So we're doing this to protect you. But I don't think people are buying into that either, Andrea. And unless it came to an actual invasion in our country, or an imminent invasion, I don't think anybody with their right mind would take up arms, especially to fight and die for a country led by who? Keir Starmer or Rishi Sunak? No chance. No chance.
Yeah, very interesting. I'm looking at the chat, and there's a message from Red. A brilliant point is that the policy is to seed the idea and enable it via the next uniparty baton holders. And I think that's often what happens in politics. Thank you, Red, for doing that. If you do want to phone in as well, it'd be lovely to hear your voice. The reality is that people bounce ideas, potential policy, and basically see how the electorate would respond to it. What do you think of that, James?
In terms of the money side of things, it comes back to that old magic money tree, doesn't it? They can conjure up 37 billion for test and trace, or all the billions that were given to Tory friends and contacts for the PPE, which had to be burnt. That was fine. We found the money for that. So I think the money side of this is actually irrelevant. I agree with Rick's initial point that if this really was about building cohesion and doing good services in the community, then I would be fully behind it. But sadly, I don't think it's got anything to do with that. I think it's the fact that we've got a recruitment problem in our military, and our government are taking us to war.
Yeah, what's interesting as well, I was listening to the former head of the Royal Navy, Admiral Lord West, and he said that the proposal was bonkers, was the word that he used, because it would deplete the defence budget. And I think it's the lowest it could possibly be since Napoleonic times, I think they said. Grant Shapps, what he says the scheme will toughen up Britain's youth external and boost the UK's resilience. So interesting on that sort of side. And I think Sir Keir, he's not completely against the idea, because he wants to review all of the threats that Britain are facing. He promises this sort of 100-day review and see what happens if they win the election. Thank you very much to Red and the others who are making all sorts of comments online. Do get in touch. We're going to take a break. We're straight back after these important messages.
TNT's Dirk Pullman.
In America, growing up, there was always such a gap in kind of our historical knowledge, because if you look at our sources of information, it was always the Germans. All of this information that we were taught as Americans comes from the Germans. A lot of it comes from Franz Halder and people like that who wrote after the war.
Yeah, then we have to explain Franz Halder had been, that is a very interesting story in the beginning. Franz Halder had been the chief of staff of the German armed forces. He was planning the war against the Soviet Union. And he is responsible for the atrocities, because he published these orders which declared that the civilian population would have to be treated not according to the Geneva Convention, that the Russian soldiers, the Soviet soldiers, should not be treated according to that. So the war of extermination, which it was, he was the architect of that.
The Dirk Pullman Show on today's News Talk, TNT. TNT is an independent global news talk station that does what others only say they do. TNT is a live radio and TV broadcaster that simply tells the truth 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. No one in the world does what we do, crisscrossing the globe, providing credible news and opinion all day and all night. In 2.5 years, TNT has become a credible and exciting platform with brilliant hosts and staff. It's a critical time, and we must continue to call out the misinformation and propaganda from mainstream media and their powerful sponsors. We're now appealing to our many friends and supporters around the world to go to tntradio.live and make a small donation to TNT while we seek the right investors to continue our important mission.
Tracking global corruption and threats that undermine our security. This is the Muckrakers on today's News Talk, TNT.
Welcome back indeed. It's Andrew Ewald here with the Muckrakers, and we're joined by TNT royalty Rick Munn and James Friedman. Now, former US President Donald Trump says he will give very serious consideration, I've avoided doing the accent, to pardoning Julian Assange if he is returned to office in the upcoming presidential election. And the Australian WikiLeaks founder is currently fighting extradition to the US, where he faces espionage charges carrying a maximum 175-year sentence for publishing, and it is publishing, bear in mind, classified information obtained from the whistleblower Chelsea Manning. Now, this is a story we covered last week, and I predicted what would happen when they were in court, and he's given leave to appeal because of the woolly language, let me put it that way. It's promising news for the sanctity of free speech, isn't it, James?
He's got history on this. He flip-flops around on Assange, to be honest with you. He was all for it when WikiLeaks was publishing data exposing Hillary Clinton in the campaign back in 2016. He loved WikiLeaks then. When he was elected president, though, he changed his tune, and he refused to support Assange, condemned him even, and said that it was damaging to the American government. Now we've got another election. And of course, Robert F. Kennedy Jr. is very, very much supporting Assange. Suddenly, Trump is considering pardoning him again. So I don't think there's any real credibility with Trump on this. I have to say that I do hope Trump gets in because Biden is a danger to the world. And I think at least Trump isn't part of the globalist club. But I do think there are big question marks over Trump. Safe and effective is another one. Which he repeated that mantra recently in a speech, which is very, very worrying, given all that's happened, the military mandates, the number of people that have been injured in the US. So, yeah, I take it with a pinch of salt, to be honest with you, Andrew.
Yeah, I mean, and you make an interesting point, and I made the point previously on the thing of appeal and why he was given leave to appeal. They were saying there that obviously, as you know, they needed assurances that a couple of things, that he wouldn't be prejudiced and that he would be able to rely on the First Amendment, the freedom of speech. And what they said in response to the US is that he could seek to rely. Well, everybody can seek to rely. And I said those woolly words would mean that effectively the court would rule in Assange's favour and he would be able to appeal. Well, it's the same with good old Donald, isn't it? I mean, he's saying he'll consider Julian Assange. Why didn't he just come out and say, if he gets in, I'll pardon Assange? Wouldn't that be easier, Rick?
It would, but then it would mean commitment to actually doing something or being called out as a downright liar. So again, talking about fluffy speech, not just considering it, Andrew, very important to stress that he's seriously considering it. Like that makes any difference at all by adding the word seriously in there. I was once given a piece of advice by somebody much older and wise than me. He said, listen, if anybody asks you to do something, don't knock yourself out of the picture by saying no. Just even if you're never going to do it, say, I'll consider that. I'll give that serious consideration, just to give the impression that it's something that you may be carrying through on. Trump had the opportunity to pardon Assange before he left office in his last presidential term. He made it adamantly clear that he wasn't going to do that. And that's, don't forget, against the backdrop of Barack Obama pardoning Chelsea Manning when she were partly way through their sentence in their involvement in the WikiLeaks thing as well. So Trump missed an opportunity there. And of course, Andrew, if he says he will do it and he doesn't, that puts him off to the wrong foot. So he's trying to be all things to all people here and keep his options open. Personally speaking, I don't think he'll frame, because he would have done it the last time he had opportunity, which was when he was the sitting president of the United States. He didn't take that opportunity. He was very aggressive towards Assange. So I don't know. Maybe he's mellowed out a little bit, or maybe he's just bullshitting coming up to an election. I think time will tell.
Well, I think it's the point that Red so brilliantly made in the chat, is that you sort of seed these ideas, which all politicians do, don't they? They sort of throw it out and see which ones the electorate like. But what do you then, I think, James, what do you think the chances of this happening? What are they?
I don't know really, but I agree with everything Rick said. I think this is, and like I said, I think this is Trump flip-flopping again. There's a big debate about whether Biden or Trump, Robert F. Kennedy will take the most votes from. So he is trying to cover his ass here from RFK taking votes. I think that's what this is about, essentially. He's trying to guard his rear side, but not make any commitments, like Rick said. If you think Assange should be free, which he should, then why not just come out and say that if I'm president again, I will pardon him? I think it's a bit wishy-washy, to be honest with you.
No, I agree totally. I'm so fed up of people just saying, well, they might stand in elections, or they might do this, and subject to my being wrong, this is what's going to happen. The reality is, and this is why it's so important, is Assange was a publisher. He's a publisher. He didn't steal the information. And so many other publishers need to be in the position that they get certainty that they can publish with impunity. And you need to look at that sort of side, because I do think that's sort of a horrendous thing. But also, Julian Assange, we know a lot of the people in his court, and I don't think he's a very well man at the moment, and I think that's a big problem as well, isn't it, Rick?
Yeah, the guy effectively, listen, he's been tortured, psychologically tortured in Belmarsh prison for just over 5 years now. Before that, of course, he was holed up in the Ecuadorian embassy before he was put into Belmarsh. And it's worth bearing in mind here that he's never went to trial and he's never been convicted of any crime. And to be held in those conditions is beyond horrific. Solitary confinement is deemed to be a form of torture by the United Nations. And he now effectively has been tortured for the last 5 years. He's a disheveled character. He's aged terribly in his time in there, and I can't even begin to imagine what he's going through mentally just in those environments, Andrew, let alone the pressure that's constantly over him, whether he'll be extradited or not. Of course, Mike Pompeo famously admitted that they were planning to kill the guy. So, he's got to be concerned that if he gets to America, what are they going to do to him while they're there? They've promised again to treat him nicely. They won't be too hard on the guy, but again, those are just promises. How do you get the government to stand over that if they get their paws on him and they stick him into a supermax facility, which may actually make Belmarsh look like a proverbial holiday camp? So, yeah, the guy's in a terrible state mentally and physically at the minute. I believe he's being tortured psychologically and physically tortured, and has been for a minimum of 5 years now in Belmarsh prison. It's atrocious the way he's been treated.
And as you say, before that, he was 7 years at the Ecuadorian embassy, and before that, he was under house arrest. So psychologically, it is appalling how he is being treated. And the trouble is, it's such an emotive subject, because as soon as you talk about putting soldiers' lives at risk, the electorate are going to respond in a certain way. I think we have to change the narrative and actually point out, look, he is a publisher. He didn't steal this. He is a publisher. And the knock-on effect for freedom of speech, if it doesn't go the right way, is crazy. I think Donald should step up and say, give absolute certainty he will pardon Assange if he gets in, and fly that up the flagpole. One final thing, though. I mean, it's James, it's an interesting one. A pardon doesn't necessarily mean innocence, though, does it?
I don't think it really matters at this stage. I don't think we're ever going to get a verdict on Assange. I mean, the process is the punishment, right? I don't think they want a verdict on Assange because it causes all sorts of political problems for them. So I just think they'll draw this out as long as they can, punish him further. And, I think Rick's right. His health is, in pretty poor condition. He couldn't even come to court for many of the days because of his health is so bad. I do fear for his life, to be honest with you, and whether he will ever be released, even if he is pardoned. I think that is a real risk here.
No, I think you're absolutely right. Well, let me move on to getting another story. I'm very interested to hear people's views at home. Do call us on the numbers we gave earlier. But let me move on to something else, which is one woman was killed and another seriously injured in a double stabbing in the popular seaside town of Bournemouth last Friday. The killer is still at large after the attack at Durley Chine Beach shortly before midnight on Friday evening, with the police appealing for witnesses to come forward. Well, tell me, Rick, why do you think crime is so out of control in the UK?
I've heard several commentators on this particular topic, Andrew, and some people are of the belief that there is no extra crime at the minute. It's simply more reporting of crimes are happening now than the crime level has never increased. It's always been the same. We're hearing more about it now, but I'm not buying that one personally, and I'll tell you why. Based on my own lived life experience growing up in the 70s, the 80s, the 90s in Northern Ireland, now we're into the 2020s. When I think back to my school years, for example, assaults in school, I didn't see them. Drug problems at school, I didn't see it. Stabbings in school, I didn't see it. And, I went to some pretty rough establishments, but that stuff just didn't happen. It was the same in the community. People didn't carry knives around. There weren't open attacks. There weren't assaults where people were stomping on people's heads and doing God knows what. Of course, the crime was there. Of course, it did happen. There were stabbings, there were violence, but not on the level that it's at the minute. So I don't have who can provide the actual statistics for this over the course of time. I'm sure people can, but based on my lived experience, I would very much fall into the camp that crime is increasing, and it's against the backdrop of lesser policing levels or inadequate policing that's exacerbating the situation even further. That's, again, just my own take on it based on what I've seen and experienced growing up here.
Yeah, it is interesting. As you know, my background is as a lawyer, and one of the things that we did is study sociology and the sociology of deviance. One of the reasons I did that, it sounded such a deliciously titled course. But what they were saying is actually the increase, as you wisely pointed out, not necessarily in the crime, but in the reporting of it. And the more people get to hear of the reports, the more they look out for it on that sort of basis. They assume that certain things are happening. But part of the reason that there is this increase, if you like, and in reporting is also the police don't seem to be doing anything. And that's a big issue as well, isn't it, James?
You might be right about the reporting of crimes overall and the fact that the reporting is going up, not crimes. But I think it's clear that the crimes that people are most worried about, i.e. violent crime, they are increasing. There's no doubt about that. They're happening in schools. We're seeing it on trains, commuter trains into London. There is no doubt that is increasing. And I think there's many problems with British policing, to be honest with you. The first I would start with is the fact that when the coalition government came in 2010, the first thing they did is retire off 10,000 of the most experienced police officers that we had in the country. And then what do they do a few years later? They bring in a load of new officers with no experience. That has had a huge impact on policing in the UK. But also our legislation. Knife crime isn't a new trend. It's been growing over many, many years. And when you look at the laws that are there to deter it, they're all wrong. So, for example, if you possess a gun, there is a minimum sentence of 5 years, whereas for a knife, it is a maximum sentence of 4 years for possession. And when you actually look at the sentences being dished out, I think it's 7.5 months is the average sentence for somebody caught carrying one of these big knives in one of our big cities. I think we need to fix that, Andrew.
Well, no, you're absolutely right. And I always say that trust comes in on foot and leaves on horseback. And trust in politicians, in the media, and in the police is at an all-time low, isn't it? Tell me how you restore that trust, Rick.
Well, it's very, very difficult. Someone once said that if someone betrays your trust, it's like breaking a mirror. You can take the pieces of the mirror, you can put them all back together with glue, but you're always going to see the cracks in that mirror every time that
and
you
7
use it.
years bad luck, which you seem to be having more than that at the moment.
At least 7 years bad luck. Here's the thing, Andrew. When we're talking about the Assange business, and you're talking about your background in law, Prison is supposed to be a deterrent, or it's somewhere that you should fear to go for a long time because of crimes that you've committed. Now, you take the example of Julian Assange in context with this conversation. He's never been convicted of a crime, and yet he's in a maximum security prison. The people that, for example, if you look at the collateral murder video that murdered innocent civilians, they were never arrested and tried. You look at David McBride recently in Australia, the whistleblower who's one of our colleagues here on TNT. He never killed anyone. He blew the whistle, and now he's serving potentially 5 years and 8 months in an Australian prison for simply wanting to shine a light on the dark underbelly of the ADF. You look at Subway vigilantes or heroes that are intervening and saving people from being attacked. They're being arrested for assault in New York while the perpetrators are getting off for free. So in this inverted society, is the message not being given out? Well, there is no fear of consequence. If you do the right thing, you're more likely to be locked up in a prison than if you're a violent criminal. And we're being told all the time that laws are being relaxed. We can't prosecute all these people. We don't have the capacity to jail them, and we don't have the legal system in place. It's so backlogged up, we'll have to drop certain cases. So I think it's giving out the wrong message. I think that's the problem as well. The messaging's all wrong. If you're a good citizen and you do something that's right, you could end up in jail. But if you're a criminal, you could walk free. So where's the fear of consequence? Where's the deterrent? It's not there.
Yeah. Well, there are three aspects since you raised it, there are three aspects to the idea of prison. And first of all, it is supposed to be a punishment for the crime. It is supposed to then be a deterrent to stop others doing it. But the third thing is also about rehabilitation. And they're trying to get people back into society afterwards. And one of the reasons, a lot of people, there's always headlines about sentencing being far too lenient. And one of the reasons they started to televise the sentencing is to basically trying to explain to people. And it's supposed to be a science. There is a sort of method that they do. So the sentencing, what's called the Sentencing Council, effectively have a tariff. And they say, this is what you get for shoplifting. This is what you get for a burglary. This is what you get for theft and so on and so forth and assault. And there is that tariff. And you have two factors. One are called aggravating factors, which means you get more than the normal. And also you have mitigating circumstances, which means you get less. And I think the whole idea is to try to explain to the general public why you've got this particular mechanisms. Do you think that's working? Because we have wall-to-wall television in the States. You remember, for example, the O.J. Simpson case, and people were obsessed with tuning into that. In the UK, we still have sketch artists who have to draw little pictures of the guys, don't they, or gals on that sort of basis. Do you think it's helping restore trust, James, that we're getting these sentences at least being televised?
I wouldn't like to go down the route of the US, to be honest with you. I think it makes a bit of a mockery of the of our justice system, bringing the cameras in. It kind of it ends up, these political cases as well. I think it all just becomes a bit of a circus. Going back to your question, though, on how to restore trust in the police. Well, look, how about not arresting people when they do not wear masks that do nothing? How about, instead of painting rainbow colored cars and talking about diversity all the time, police are actually out stop and searching people. I mean, there is no reason why the police should not be stopping people and searching them for these knives. We should increase the minimum terms, not the maximum terms, so that, criminals and gang members, they know that if they're caught carrying a knife, they're going to go away for a minimum amount of time. I think if we start doing all of this, then we will restore our trust in the police.
No, good point. Well, chat is going crazy on the subject this time, which is always very refreshing to see. They've got lots and lots of opinions. I love that. Let me read out one of them. Eric in the chat, he says he agrees the statistics need to be looked at closely. Are the types of crime different? So you have a look at that sort of side. Are there more widespread across communities? He says he feels safer years ago, less police protection. He's not sure about that. And it needs to be studied. Thank you, Eric. You make some excellent points. Do let us know your views. We'd like to do that. And if you want to call in, we'd be delighted to do that. One final point before we go to a break. Who is to blame and what can be done about this, Rick?
Well, look at the police. Just very briefly, the police at the minute, they're the first line of defense against crime, or at least they're supposed to be. Back in the day, you had the Bobby on the beat. And when you did see a policeman, at least where I came from, you couldn't join the police force if you were male unless you were at least 6 feet tall and fit. So when you look at some of the police that are plodding the beat at the minute, if you even see them, you're more likely to see them in a squad car. And let's just say the fitness levels maybe aren't there, and they don't exactly strike fear into the hearts of criminals. A lot of of links have been broken with local communities without direct policing as well. I think we need to get back to policing basics, Andrew, get back to meritocracy when it comes to police, not diversity hires, and make sure that they're tight with the community rather than being driving around in cars, eating donuts, which seems to be for most of their shift. And I'm not stereotyping there at all.
James, final word for you before the break.
Yeah, I think policing has been politicised over the past couple of decades. We've now got police and crime commissioners, we've got mayors, and it's clear that the police are quite often pulled to and fro by the politicians. I think it's high time the politicians left the police alone to get on with the job and started focusing on legislation and toughening up the laws where they need to be and just let the police do their jobs.
Wonderful. You're watching The Muckrakers with me, Andrew Ebon, the wonderful Rick Munn, and also James Friedman here on TNT. We'll be back with you straight after these messages.
My baby's back from the West Coast. Here are those pictures that you asked for your school project? First day of school, cute as a button.
So long ago.
Oh, here's Grandma Florence after that flood wiped out the whole neighborhood. Sometimes I just cannot believe all the storms we've gone through here. I can only hope that we'll be able to leave this house to you one day, baby. You're our legacy.
Planning for these disasters will make sure we're safe, and it's the best way to protect that legacy.
Those beans smell heavenly.
Give Mom a little credit.
You know what? We should make an emergency communication plan. That way we're ready this year.
Great idea.
At my dorm, we have emergency kits for earthquakes and wildfires, but I'm sure there's something more local. I can send you with the link.
Okay.
Smart.
I'm coming to share with you guys.
Protect your legacy. Plan for natural disasters today. Visit ready.gov/plan.
Even the thought of dementia can feel scary. It's why we put off getting help, even though we've noticed changes in our thinking or memory. But an early diagnosis can change everything, giving you medical help and a support system around you to help you live better. Start with Dementia Australia's online checklist, because the sooner you know, the more you can do.
Tracking global corruption and threats that undermine our security. This is the Muckrakers on today's News Talk, TNT.
This is indeed TNT. You're watching The Muckrakers with me, Andrew Eborn, and the finest that we can dig at this time of the morning, afternoon, or evening, wherever you might be, Rick Munn and James Friedman. But I do want to hear from you. The chat is going wild, actually on topics now, which is fantastic. So love to get you involved. Thank you for that. You can also call in. We'd like to get your voices heard. People always say there's no opportunity to have their voices heard. That ain't true. You can have it here on TNT. And here's how you can do it.
Our lines are open. From the U.S. and Canada, call 1-888-201-6425. From the U.K., call 033-0024-1026. And from Australia and New Zealand, call 1-800-670-310. Free speech is alive and well on today's News Talk, TNT Radio.
Free speech is indeed alive and well and very healthy here on TNT. And we absolutely welcome all your views. Now, we've been hopping around the world for the last few days, getting views from different places. But in the US, there's a claim that it's the world's only superpower and leading democracy. President Joe Biden said this on Saturday, and he was addressing the US Military Academy graduates at West Point, New York. He basically praised the role of the military in standing up to tyrants worldwide and protecting freedom and openness. A very powerful speech, no doubt written by ChatGPT, but he had all the right sort of messages in there. The whooping went beyond whoopingness ever. Do you believe, though, James, that the US is the world's only superpower?
The biggest economy still, but things are changing. I think GDP-wise, America is about 15.5% of global GDP. The G7 is 30%. But interestingly, now we've got the BRICS nations, obviously Brazil, Russia, India, China, South Africa, and we've got Saudi Arabia and Iran and others joined now. Well, they represent 31.6%. So I think the days of America being the only superpower are diminishing. we're definitely moving towards a multipolar world, because the rest of the world, I think, is fed up with America being the only superpower. China and Russia, for example, are now, I think it's more than 90% of their trade, their bilateral trade, is now transacted in currencies other than the dollar. And other BRICS countries are talking about doing the same. So the days where America can rely on its position with the dollar as the world reserve currency are going. They're going. And I think Biden can talk it up as much as he wants. I think in a decade's time, we're going to be looking at a very, very different picture globally.
Yeah, and I don't actually blame Biden. I mean, this is America first, and we say here. I remember when Boris was mayor of London, he always gave the speech that London is the finest city in the world. We can greet anybody from any corner in native language and so on and so forth. That's what leaders are supposed to do, isn't it? Is to pump themselves up and the relevant country or city that they represent. Isn't that right, Rick?
Well, it is. I mean, like, he's never going to come out and say, America's going to the dogs and we're losing strength and we're becoming weaker and weaker by the month and the year. You're never going to hear that out of his mouth. I think the best way that I can analyze this and paint the picture of this is, if you can imagine a pride of lions, there's always a dominant male that leads that pride of lions. He's over all the other males and the females. He's the king of the hill. But over time, Andrew, that lion will age and he will lose muscle strength and his teeth will begin to fall out, and sooner or later he is usurped by younger lions coming up through the pack. And I think what we're seeing and witnessing at the minute is the decline of that leadership or that spearheadness of America when it comes to world dominance. Without a shadow of a doubt, they're weakening and weakening by the day. The debt situation's out of control. And of course, with news stations like this, don't forget, in the 80s and the 90s, there was no internet. There was no alternate narrative to the one that was being brought forward. So when you look at something like Assange that we've discussed, he shone a light on American war crimes. They're there for the world to see. So when Biden talks about standing up to tyrants and protecting freedom and openness, you only have to look at Julian Assange. He's standing up to tyrants and he's languishing in Belmarsh prison as a result of it. So they can't get away with the rhetoric the way they used to, because now there's alternative forms for people to express themselves that's not CNN and not Fox News. You have the like of TNT, for example, to shine a light on the lies and the spin and the propaganda that's being pumped out incessantly from these warmongers like Biden.
Yeah, I always say that sunlight is the best disinfectant, and we actually want to encourage lots of views. There are many stations who say, well, we don't want to hear an alternative view, and people sort of surround themselves, basically in that echo chamber, if you like. They have friends who have the same views as them. They go to social media and basically regurgitate those views. They read the same newspaper and so on and so forth, tune into the same channels, and anybody can find any argument they want to support their own personal point of view. What I love about TNT is we encourage voices. We can unpack it. We want people who disagree with us so we can show them what the truth is. And by encouraging that sort of side, that's got to make sense, doesn't it, Rick?
Yeah, it does. And again, it's very important that you don't have to agree with everybody that you speak to, but you've got to at least listen to what they have to say. And then that will give you an opportunity, if you're given the opportunity to speak, to counter the narrative that they're pushing, at least to get your point across and to give people exposure to what the truth is. So sometimes actually the best people you can talk to are the ones that you don't agree with, because it gives you an opportunity to respectfully pick holes in their arguments, and also their audience that will come maybe to back their heroes will get alternative sources of information as a result of that. So yes, the echo chamber model or the limited hangout model, I believe, is very detrimental. It's not a positive thing at all.
Yeah, and I do genuinely believe that having intelligent, informed debate. And I look at lots of things on social media, people just regurgitating. They're slinging insults around, and we're finding that in politics. I mean, Joe Biden, Donald Trump always famously said it was sleepy Joe Biden. Sunak's now saying that about Starmer, isn't he? Sort of turning around and saying he's a bit slow and not really enthusiastic and doesn't have any energy. Do you think that's fair, James?
I think that politics these days is dumbed down, yes. I mean, I always look back at the 2010 election, because that was so farcical, and we're seeing it happening again now. But what happened back in 2010 is there were many problems facing the country. We were going into austerity and all of that. But the argument between the two political parties came down to 6 billion in their budgets, and the whole election campaign was literally run on that. When that's insignificant, and obviously ignoring the big questions. The same's happening in the election in the UK at the moment. I want to know if politicians, if there's another so-called pandemic, whether they're going to lock us in our houses. I want to know if they're going to arrest people for not wearing masks. I want to know if they're going to try and force another poisonous shot on the population. I think all of the things they're talking about, like the energy cap, national service, and all of this, couldn't give a monkey's about. It's happening again. They're ignoring all of the big questions which really matter to people and just talking about a lot of the fluff.
Yeah, and one of the things I highlighted last week, which seemed to have escaped the mainstream media, was Oliver Dowden, the deputy PM. He announced this new website where he's basically encouraging people to stock up on provisions to basically they'll be covered with dry goods and toilet paper and various other things in case there's an emergency. And there's a website telling people to do this, which doesn't seem to be picked up in the mainstream media as much, does it, Rick?
No, it doesn't. But ironically, that's stuff that we were telling people to do for years here on TNT. Is listen, we're not talking about the end of the world here, getting a bunker in your back garden, but be sensible in case there is a food shortage. Stock up on your dried food. Oh, you're crazy. It's never going to come to that. Now the government are advocating this, albeit for 3 days. And, you can survive for up to 60 days with no food, but it's not going to be a pleasant experience, but you need water to do that. So 3 days is better than nothing, but it's not really going to sustain you in the long term either. So odd that they're coming out with that messaging too. And just one other thing, Andrew, I want to pick up on with the like of Starmer. Just for an example, and also what we're talking about having access to the internet now, many people. Starmer came out with a mantra this week about country first, party second, country first, party second. But a lot of people have jumped on that one particular statement and said, well, it's not so long ago that you said that you would prefer to be in Davos in Switzerland with the World Economic Forum rather than in Westminster, for example. So if you want to make an accurate statement, you could say Davos first, country second, party third, if you really wanted to be accurate about this. So there's a lot of, let's say, evidence out there against anything that these politicians are coming up with in the run into the GE. They're time-stamped and they're there for the world to see.
Yeah, I think the biggest problem I've got at the moment with the campaign is a sort of negative campaign. And I've made this point before, is that people are not voting for positively. The biggest winner, for example, in the local elections was apathy. And you had turnouts of things like 32% or some places even 22%, where people are just not incentivized to vote. Why do you think that is, James?
I think a lot of people don't feel like their vote counts. I mean, I'll give you an example here in the South Wales valleys. Labour have got a stranglehold here, and our voting system, it doesn't matter whether people go out to vote because, the Labour politicians here in the main get around 50%, if not more, up to 60% of the vote. I think there's a lot of people that are disenfranchised, with politics. And the problem we've got is obviously our voting system, but also the fact that a lot of the small parties which are coming through, because they haven't got that infrastructure locally, their votes tend to be spread across the country. And so what happens is, it just, their votes don't count. And you just end up with this tennis game between red and blue. And I think that's what people are really, really sick about. The fact that our politics are polarized now and most people don't have a voice.
Yeah, I think you make it. We had an excellent caller on the show last week, Janie, who made the point. She felt that it really would make no difference, and as a result, she wasn't going to vote at all. I use the analogy; it's rather like the adult version. Voting is the adult version of writing a letter to Santa Claus. So you're working on that sort of principle, and that's a real problem, isn't it? I think there should be a positive thing to do. I think politicians treat the electorate as though they're stupid, and they're not stupid. They understand real issues, and they want people who can come up with real solid solutions, but they also want them costed. And what I love about what we do on this show and the shows that both of you wonderful gentlemen do as well, is that you can unpack and say, hold their feet to the fire. If they're going to come up with a particular policy, how much does it cost? Where's that money coming from? And what are we going to lose as a result of it? What do you think, Rick?
Well, the analogy with writing a letter to Santa Claus, actually, let's be honest about it. If you wrote a letter to Santa Claus today or a letter to your local MP today, the chances are probably higher that Santa will reply to your letter than your local MP, which does reflect the disdain with which they hold most of their electorate. So you can understand why people are disenfranchised, that they're filled full of despair. Interestingly, though, Andrew, there's a lot of independence springing up now, and I think if we are to see actual real change, the unit party needs to be done away with. We need to have a clean slate with uncompromised independence. There, the problem with that, if you want to call it a problem, is there's so much fragmentation. So you still have that one Labour Party, you still have that one Tory party, but the independent parties, there's multiple independents or people running solely in that respect. I'm not saying about getting together in another independent party, but what I mean is there's too much division, and that old adage divide and conquer works especially well when it comes to politics. Hence we see the domination of red and blue in America, and the Tories and the Labour Party here in the UK, with a few also brands mixed in there as well. Unity is what it's all about if you want to get election success.
Yeah, interesting. It was George Galloway who brilliantly put it. He said they're basically two cheeks of the same backside, and trying to work out the sort of difference. I think Rishi's running a campaign on fear, as I've highlighted before, and basically we're on track now. If you change track, we're going to lose the momentum that we've got. And Keir is on the basis of all change. You've got to do something different. What's the secret then of winning the election, James?
Of winning the election? Lots of money, corruption. Where do I start? Look, I think the public need to get over their fear in politics, because this is how it operates at the moment. The Tories point to Labour and say, if you vote them in, all these bad things will happen. The Labour politicians all point to the Tories and say, well, if you vote for anyone else apart from us, Tories are going to do all this bad stuff. Look, it cannot get any worse. Pretty much. Well, it can't get much worse, put it that way, than what it's been over the past few years. So I think people need to start voting positively, looking at some of the small parties and saying, do you know what, I'm not playing this game of red and blue anymore, and voting.
Yeah, absolutely. It's a great point to finish on. Time has flown by. Thank you all so much for all of your comments. Thank you, gentlemen. It's always a joy to join you. Join me, Andrew Eborn, next time for the Muckrakers. But for now, be good, be safe, and I'll see you next time. Take care.
To hear a replay of this hour, go to episodes at tntradio.live. Now, TNT Radio News.
Back again with your hourly news brief. I'm Matt Boyland. Donald Trump's dropped a bombshell, revealing in a podcast interview that he is seriously considering pardoning WikiLeaks founder Julian Assange if he's re-elected in November. The Australian-born journalist was last week granted permission by London's High Court to appeal his extradition to the US, where he's wanted on a list of espionage charges.
Will you pardon Julian Assange? Well, I'm going to talk about that today, and we're going to give it very serious consideration.
The ex-commander-in-chief had the chance to pardon Assange, along with America's Edward Snowden, during his first term in office, but chose not to. Here he is back in 2021, explaining why.
Why decide not